read from Daniel chapter 1. We're going to read from verse 8 to the end of the chapter. Daniel chapter 1, verse 8. We're told in verse 8, Daniel chapter 1, that Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favour and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in his kingdom. And we thank God for his word this morning. Lord, we just want to pray, Lord, that you help us to understand what this passage means for us, Lord. Help us to understand, Lord, that Daniel's life is a life that speaks to us, a life that challenges us. Daniel is saying to us that you, in your situation, that you can do what I did, that you can resolve in your heart not to defile yourself, and that God will be with you. So, Lord, we just want to pray and thank you for this opportunity in thy precious name. Amen. Well, if you remember last Sunday, we looked at this resolve of Daniel. It was a heartfelt resolve. It was this stirring within his spirit. And that stirring within his spirit is that he did not want to defile himself with the king's food. And the decision that he made was a life-defining decision and also a character-defining decision. There are some decisions that we have to make that are character-defining and life-defining. And this was one of those decisions that Daniel had to make. And what it meant for Daniel was this, that he was making that decision that he would not be dependent upon the favour of Nebuchadnezzar. But Daniel knew that if he did that, that if he said that I'm going to be dependent upon Nebuchadnezzar, it would open the door in his life of things that would not have been good. Basically for Daniel, the choice he had to make was this. Do I submit and give myself to a heavenly king or an earthly king? And Daniel said, no, I've got to make this decision that I've got to live for the heavenly king. You know, but it must have been very tempting for Daniel. You know, that food was in front of him. You know, one of the ways that you can tempt people is with food. Okay? So the food was right in front of him. It must have smelled wonderful. And everybody else was eating the food. It's very hard at times when we have to stand apart from the crowd, because often we get comfort in being part of a majority. But Daniel had to stand apart. You know, often, brothers and sisters, the easy option is not the best option, and the easy option is often not the option that God wants us to choose. Daniel had to make a difficult, life-defining, character-defining choice, and that was the most difficult of choices that he had to make. There was the option for Daniel of immediate gratification. But Daniel knew that in making the easy choice, it would have consequences for his life that would not be very good. You know, the great biblical example of that is Esau, isn't it? When you remember the story when Esau, he was out in the field, he came in very hungry, and his brother Jacob was a bit of a trickster, and Jacob had prepared this wonderful stew, and Esau came in and he smelled the food. It smelled so wonderful, and he said to his brother Jacob, "Give me some of that food." But Jacob said, "Yes, you can have that food. You can gratify immediately the hunger that you feel, but there's going to be a cost, and the cost is that your birthright will be taken from you." And Esau, if you remember, he decided that he would rather have immediate gratification, and he didn't want his birthright. And the consequences throughout his life for Esau were very costly. Daniel had to make a choice. And he said, "I resolve at the very beginning, at the very start, that I am not going to defile myself." Now, from that decision, 4 things resulted. We'll look at those 4 things this morning. Number 1, there was blessing. Number 2, there was disturbance. Number 3, there was testing. And then number 4, there was blessing again. I'm glad there are two bits of blessing in there. So blessing, disturbance, testing, and blessing. Let's look at the first blessing. In verse 9, we're told this. But after Daniel made that decision, we're told in verse 9 that God gave Daniel favour and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. So before Daniel begins this 10-day testing, before Daniel begins this 3 years of training, we are told that God gives. That God gives to Daniel. In both verses 9, we're told that God gives at the start of the 3-year program. And then in verse 17, we're told that God gives again at the end of the 3-year program. So at the start of the program and at the end of the program, there is God's giving of his grace and mercy to Babylon. God gives. Even in a place where false gods were being worshipped, where demons were being worshipped, God's action, God's power is not constrained. This morning, brothers and sisters, you might think that I'm in a situation that is very difficult for me, and you might think to yourself that God's action is constrained by my circumstances. But for Daniel in Babylon, in exile, in the court of King Nebuchadnezzar, with the enchanters and the magicians all around him, God gave. God is not restricted by situations, by circumstances, because he is God. And what did God give? It says that God gave favour. Now, that word favour is a word that is used throughout the Old Testament, and it refers to God's covenant mercy and God's covenant blessing and God's covenant love. For example, we read about it in Psalm 103 verse 17. Just one example. It says, the steadfast love, and it's translated there by the word love. The steadfast love of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting. God is saying to Daniel that my covenant with you has not come to an end. that my covenant with you still stands, even though you're in a hard place, even though it's difficult for you, Daniel, even though Jerusalem is under siege, even though you've been taken from your homeland. My covenant love is still there for you. And God's covenant love was being expressed through the chief of the eunuchs. Now, the chief of the eunuchs would have been a very high official in the court of Nebuchadnezzar, a very important person. But God says, look, I'm going to show you my power, that even through this pagan official, even through this chief eunuch, my purposes are going to be realized through him. And that's reinforced by, it says that God gave Daniel favour and also compassion. Now, that word compassion means to be friendly towards someone, to be tender towards them, to be gentle towards them. You know, God must have moved the heart of this chief eunuch to feel that Daniel was somebody that I need to look after. He is somebody that I need to try and help and encourage. There must have been something within Daniel that drew this chief eunuch to him and made him realize there's something about this young boy that I need to help him. You know, it must have been really wonderful for Daniel, you know. He made that decision, that resolve, that life-altering decision. And he must have wondered, you know, have I done the right thing? Is this the right decision? But then God confirms that decision by bringing this eunuch. And this eunuch says, right, Daniel, yes, Daniel, I'm going to allow you that request. And I'm going to really help you. So God's grace, God gave. In hard places, God gives. And he gives us of his favour. Then the next thing to look at is that this decision of Daniel also brought disturbance as well. Daniel's decision threw the royal court into a meltdown. The chief eunuch, although he was favourable towards Daniel, he was also terrified. He was terrified that he would lose his head. You know, there must have been many perks working for Nebuchadnezzar, but there were also many pitfalls. There had been the wonderful palaces, the gold, the food, but always over your head there was the threat of death. If you didn't match up, you could be dispatched at any moment. When we read Daniel, one thing we will come across again and again is that these earthly kings are not particularly pleasant. You know, as we read in Daniel chapter 7, the earthly kingdoms are likened to beasts. Nebuchadnezzar, great power, and he knew it. And he would be ruthless in his execution of his purposes. Like Pharaoh, who drove the Israelites almost to death as he sought to build his temples and his storehouses. Like Satan, whom Judas sold his soul to. And when Satan had used Judas, he cast him off into darkness. There's this contrast between the merciful God who gives, who is compassionate, who gives favour and grace and forgiveness, and the kings of this world, than the enemy who comes only to steal, kill and destroy. When we resolve to follow God, it shakes the kingdom of darkness. It puts the kingdom of darkness on the back foot because it doesn't expect this response. Nobody in that court expected this response. It's often today, isn't it, that people think that all you've got to do is to flash the cash and people will go along with you. But when you get somebody who says no, there is a value system that goes beyond money. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to react. You know what? Daniel is making this kingdom of Babylon realise that there is a God in heaven who can sustain them without their favour and without their food. In Psalm 60 verse 12, we're told that through God we shall do valiantly, for it is He who will tread down our enemies. So this kingdom was shaken, and then what you see is that the chief eunuch realizes that he's in danger, and so he does a kind of a sidestep and says, okay, Daniel, what we're going to do, we're going to put this steward in charge of you. So if anything goes wrong, the steward can take the fall, not me. So we read of the steward, probably shaking by now, realizing that this Daniel is too hot to handle, that this Daniel says things that we don't expect. So this steward goes up to him, probably shaking, and says, okay, Daniel, look, the chief eunuch has told me what you have resolved to do, and he's told me that I've got to watch over you, and I've got to supply you with the food. But then at this point, we see something of the compassion of Daniel. Daniel says to this steward, look, I can see where you are, I can see your predicament. What I'm going to do, I'm going to say to you, test me for 10 days. And if after 10 days you look at me and I'm not in a good shape, fine, I will go back to eating the king's food. You know, Daniel helped the steward. You know, often, when people talk about faith today, they see faith almost as a battering ram. People strut up and down the stage, and they talk about faith as though it was a bulldozer. And if you haven't got faith, there's something wrong with you. It's that sort of attitude. But what we see in Daniel is a realization that this steward was struggling. He was struggling to get the vision. So Daniel said, look, I'm going to help you. I'm not going to bulldoze you to the ground. I'm going to try and help you to see things from the perspective of the living God. You know, when God shows us favour, He gives us the ability to show compassion. So there's this great disturbance in the royal courts. Things are being stirred up. Things are not going as they expected. This Daniel, you know, he had thrown them a curveball, as they would say if they were playing baseball, a curveball. They were being thrown. What do? We don't know what to do. But then there comes the testing. Living for God is not easy. There will be trials and tests that faith will have to go through to prove itself. For Daniel, that test lasted 3 years. There was the initial 10-day test, but then there was the 3 years in which he had to eat vegetables and water. You know, quite a kind of meagre diet, really. But it was a testing. In 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 1 to 6, we read this. He says, in this you rejoice. He's talking about some of the blessings of the Christian life. He says, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honour. The revelation of Jesus Christ. If anyone tries to sell you a Christian life, which is a paradise continuously, it is absolutely false. It is false. The health, wealth, prosperity gospel is not a gospel that we find in the New Testament, brothers and sisters. James even goes further. In James chapter 1, he says this. James chapter 1 verses 2, he says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." James says, count it all joy. What a thing to say. You count it joy when God tests your faith. You count it joy because you know that God is doing a deep work within your life. Because God wants to take you to that next level in his walk with you. For Daniel, it lasted 3 years. 3 years of testing. 3 years of eating the same vegetables, drinking the same water, day in, day out. He must have felt, when is it going to come to an end? But Daniel knew that the resolve that he had made was a resolve in which God was going to do a work in his life. So James says, and let steadfastness have its full effect. Often when we face trials, what we try and do is shortcut them. I don't know about you, when things are going tough for you, well, there must be some kind of way out. There must be some shortcut that I can do. Some way that I can somehow lift myself out of that trial. But James says you've got to let it have its full effect. It's like taking medicine. If you take some medicine, the doctor will always say to you, you've got to finish the course. If you don't finish the course, the reason that the disease or the infection that you have will come back. You've got to take the full course. James is saying, you've got to let this have its full effect upon your life. Daniel knew that he had to go through this favor, this testing, because he knew that in those 3 years, the household of Nebuchadnezzar would see in this young Jewish boy the power of God that overcomes weakness. That household would see in this young Jewish boy a strength and a resolve that they'd never ever seen before. That this young Jewish boy could go through this trial, this testing, this purging, brothers and sisters. When we go through difficulties, we automatically think, well, this is from the devil. We think, well, this is something I need to get out of. If it's from God, if it's from the living God, and he's doing it because he loves you, not because he hates you. He's doing it because he realizes there's something deep within you that he needs to instill within you. And for Daniel, this 3 years of testing, what a harvest it brought in his life. We're told at the end of the testing, that we read at the end of the testing, at the end of the 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance, fatter in flesh. Amen. Fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. Daniel had grown. And we pray that may not want the fatter in flesh aspect of it, but at least fatter in spirit. Fatter in spirit. That at the end of the testing, we can look at ourselves in a spiritual mirror, as it were. We would say that we are fatter in our spirit, brothers and sisters, because we have come through this test. That our spiritual waistline, it has increased, brothers and sisters. Daniel was fatter in flesh. When we go through the testing, we are not diminished. We're not diminished. We're not emaciated. God builds a fatness into our spirit, brothers and sisters. And we have grown. We have matured. We've been through the fiery furnace of testing, brothers and sisters.
Hallelujah.
And we haven't shortcut it. We've made a resolve. But God says, right, you've got to be tested. You've got to be tested. And then we see as Daniel comes through that testing, he's fatter in his flesh than everyone else. What do we read? We read in verse 17. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and for Daniel, understanding of all visions and dreams. God's blessing. You know, in verse 9, when we're told about when God granted Daniel favour, it was kind of the favour came through somebody else. In verse 17, favour comes directly on Daniel. And the favour that God gave him was the supernatural gifting that he needed in order that he would be able to survive in the land of Babylon. Supernatural gifting. You know, Daniel, as we read in the book of Daniel, Daniel was raised to high office in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. He was the chief guy under Nebuchadnezzar. And in that situation, he needed all the wisdom, all the gifting that he could possibly have. And God says that my blessing upon you, Daniel, will be that you will have everything you need to fulfill my will. And often when we think of the blessing, I can remember many years ago, I'll never forget. And the church that I grew up in, the pastor preached a tremendous sermon upon praying and upon blessing. Tremendous sermon. And then at the end, he invited people to come up the front to be prayed for if they had things in their life they wanted. And this guy came up. And the pastor said, what is it you want us to pray for? And he said, look, I want everybody to pray for me. Yeah, wait, what was it? God to give me a Ferrari.
Oh, you're kidding.
I tell you what, you've never seen a pastor so quickly become deflated. He was up on the scene those days.
Oh my God.
But you see, the blessing that Daniel got was not a Ferrari, though it might well have been that he got some of the best chariots going, but the blessing mainly was the gifting. The gifting, brothers and sisters. The wisdom. And did he not need wisdom, brothers and sisters? I would exchange all the Ferraris in the world if I could have the wisdom of Daniel. I would exchange them all, brothers and sisters, if I could have the dreams and the visions that Daniel had, brothers and sisters. I would give them all, and I'm sure we would, wouldn't we, brothers and sisters? God said that my blessing upon you, Daniel, will be that you will be given something that flesh cannot give you. Flesh cannot give you. In Daniel, we see that not only Daniel, but his friends as well. But because Daniel kind of led the way, it's as though he was given this extra gifting. And that was the gifting in terms of the visions and the dreams that he was given. And as we read the book of Daniel, we read some of these dreams and visions. What a blessing they have been for the church. What a mighty anointing upon this man of God. God gave to him. God gave, brothers and sisters. It all came about because Daniel resolved. We often say, God bless me, bless me, bless me. Well, what resolve have we done? What resolve have we done? Do we know At times, God's blessing, it does cause a disturbance. You know, if you've got someone who is blessed, someone who is just pure quality, he will be targeted because of the quality of the gifting upon him. And then there's the testing. Testing. Brothers and sisters, this
Glory.
we may have to be tested. We may have to be tested. I always pray, God, if you're going to test me, please remember that I'm at dust and ashes. You know, go light with me. Go light with me.
Hallelujah.
But testing is not a sense of failure. It's often the kind of prelude to promotion in the kingdom of heaven. And then, as I say, God gave them. He gave them wisdom. He gave them knowledge. He gave them understanding. This guy was top of the class. This Daniel, he was a real man at that court in Babylon. He was almost untouchable because of what God had done for him. But yet, what a humble man of God. What a humble man of God. You know, at one point, we read on in the story, one of the kings, Belshazzar, said, Daniel, if you interpret this dream, you get all the gold. What did Daniel say? Look, keep it. I don't want your gold. He got it in the end anyway, but he said, keep it. I don't want it. I don't want your gold. I don't want your silver. The gold in my life is I serve the living God. That's the gold, brothers and sisters. And God be
Hallelujah.
Amen.